Hello, this is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast.
It was a crazy year, 2020. I think everybody kind of was losing their mind one way or another. But if you're listening to this, you made it through.
And they're making mistakes, and people are starting to awake.
There is a science of human freedom.
It's also a spiritual journey.
A person under hypnosis will start to see that there's something wrong. Something is wrong.
It's great that you know what you've come to know, but until there's an outlet for that information and you start creating and putting your creations out into the world to teach other people so that they can become as knowledgeable as you.
Life. What is encouraging life is good. That which takes away from life and growth and creativity is not good.
Hello. Welcome, folks, to the End Evil podcast. This is Chris Jansen. Glad to see you. I'm glad to be back. Evil is the destruction of freedom. The End Evil podcast, I came up with the idea from the book, The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. I discovered that book through a podcast called What on Earth is Happening with Mark Passio. And he was the main inspiration for me to get out there and start podcasting. But there were a lot of other awesome content creators that I came across on the way. Many of them now are showing their work on the One Great Work Network. And today I have a special guest with me, Leslie Powers, and she is a friend from who recently is showing up on the One Great Work Network. I know she's excited to be there. Her website is called alivethrive.life. And I'm going to talk today with Leslie Powers about a recent presentation that she published on the One Great Work Network Leslie Powers is a lifetime. I'm going to say lifetime, but her whole career has been. Whoops, sorry about clicking the wrong button. I was trying to bring Leslie in. There you are. Hi, Leslie. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my
Okay.
career's been in clinical social work, and I've worked
Thanks
in a
for
whole
finishing
variety
my
of
sentence.
settings, yeah, including mental health therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're pretty much your whole life career, you've worked with people or some kind of therapy type situation. Is that correct?
Social work and mental health therapy. Yes, in a variety of settings.
Well, I think that's just like fantastic because, you know, someone like yourself that spent years and years working with people and getting to understand people has a really, I think you have an excellent insight into what makes people tick, why they do the things they do. And I really liked the recent presentation that you published about truth called Truth versus Perception. And I was hoping we could have a discussion about that today.
Of course, yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you on the One Great Work Network, and it's neat to see you're putting out work. And the more people we get on, the more different perspectives. I think it really brings together the whole fabric of the reality. And I think that's really what we're talking about today is like, what is reality? You know, some people think reality can be just anything. You can make it whatever you want. And I think you and I agree that reality isn't just anything, that there is actually a such thing as truth. So I thought that'd be a good place to start off. For you, what does truth mean, and how did you discover that word as being such a fundamental word to use in your work?
Sure. Well, I think in the most fundamental way, truth is simply what is. It's what's actual, what has occurred, what is occurring. There's really only truth, you know, and where my presentation came in was around the phrase that's really frequently used, my truth. And I had been making a little video and I slipped in. I'm like, I'm excited to share my truth. And then I started to think about it and I was like, well, what do I mean by that? Like, what is my truth? What does that mean? And is there more than one truth? You know, and I started to just contemplate on the importance of the words we use and the importance of being very specific about what we mean when we say words. And when we start to, you know, commonly say, well, this is my truth, well, you can have your truth, and I'm going to just have my truth, right? It leads to this sense that truth is relative, that there isn't really truth. And so this presentation is really about questioning that a bit and saying, well, what do you mean when you say my truth? Most of the time, when people say my truth, it's more like my perception, my belief, my stand, you know, my opinion. And it can mean it can function in a lot of ways. It could be like, I don't want to listen to what you're saying. Stop challenging me. This is my truth. Just, you know, you have your truth, I'll have mine. And I was exploring how that is actually fundamentally dangerous when we start thinking about that there's more than one truth or truth is relative. And how do we discern truth and how important that is?
So are you saying that truth is dangerous?
What the question I asked is, my truth dangerous? You know, because when we start thinking about my truth as saying, well, there's really no truth, it's all relative to our perception, then we're saying there's really no truth, which then opens up the door to us being able to justify doing most anything. And it takes away, you know, the fundamental natural law principle, you know, of morality, that there is a way to discern right and wrong. And there is ultimately a truth. Now, I'm not going to say that as humans that we are able to know the truth about everything, right? You know, we're in some ways we're seekers, we're seeking truth, but there's ultimately going to be a true and a false about things that happen, right? And And when it comes to moral principles, it's really important not to go to that gray zone where we are coming from a perspective of solipsism, that we are kind of the arbitrators of truth and we get to create what's real and what's not and act accordingly to how we want it to be instead of how things are. And that's where it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, I like how you use the term perception. What occurs to me is like, okay, I'm driving through downtown and I see downtown, any big city. I see someone walking along and they're like talking to someone who I can't see, and they're having this vigorous conversation, maybe even walking out in the road. And I know, folks like that, there's all kinds of reasons why people might be in that shape. But I know that's kind of some of the people that you have dealt with in your career and your line of work. People that are just like experiencing a different reality than most of us are. So there's definitely a wide range of perceptions that people are experiencing. And I can see where that might be a little misleading in terms of making someone think that, oh, you can have one reality and I can have another, and both are true, So what is the difference there between reality, truth, and our perception? I think that's an important differentiation there. So I'm glad you put it that way. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, a big part of what I'm encouraging in this presentation is for people to question, to question what is actually true, but also more importantly, to question your own thoughts and beliefs, and to consider the idea that we are all programmed from birth, we're conditioned, we're socialized, and that socialization and programming has implanted ideas about what is real and true into our mind. And because a lot of that programming starts very, very young, that conditioning, that we don't question a lot of what we are saying is true, is right, and but I'm saying, hey, I'm inviting you to question that and say, well, wait a minute, where did this idea come from? Where did this belief come from? Did I create this through a very broad study of information, or is that just something that I was told was true by my parents and my grandparents and my teachers, and then reinforced by my friends and their parents, right? Or the media and the TV and the headlines on the newspapers. There's so many things that we, take for granted as true that play into our paradigms, the paradigms we carry in our heads that we base our decisions on. And I'm saying, wait a minute, that those things may not be actually true. And so when we are talking, in a debate or a discussion about something, and someone has a point of view that's different than ours, and we automatically sometimes put the brakes on really fast and say, but wait a minute, blah, 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 this is what's true, this is what's important. And when somebody challenges that, it can turn into this thing like, well, that's, you can think what you think, that's your truth, this is my truth, I don't want to talk about it, and stop there, right? So people are stopping and just like settling into like that's the end of the conversation. And I think that is dangerous, because the discussion, the debate, the consideration of other points of view is essential. It's essential to really finding out what's true, to getting closer to the truth, let's say, about what's going on in the world and the corruption that's going on. And unless we question it and have that debate, and instead of just sort of like shutting our minds and saying, no, I don't believe that, doesn't fit into my paradigm, it's not my truth, right? Then, then there's very high possibility that we're contributing to, evil things in the world instead of being a part of the solution to help humanity So it's really about recognizing that truth and perception are different things. Our beliefs are different than truth. And that it is important to question it, because we're in a really critical time right now in history where we really can't sit on our laurels and just go on as if nothing's wrong, and keep doing what sort of we've always been done before in the past. We're carrying on the beliefs, perceptions, the biases of our parents, and then we, change some of that and come up with our own idea of what's right. But a lot of things, they're very deep rooted. They're very programmed through a lot of conditioning and a lot of repetition. And by challenging it, we become an outsider in a sense, which is also, a distressing place to be sometimes. But the point is, question and use your words consciously. When it's your opinion, say it's your opinion. It's your perception. It's your perception. My truth is a very misleading phrase.
I know some people like to kind of make the argument, like, for instance, when we talk about moral relativism, I remember looking it up, and in textbooks they have like a bold-faced heading that says cultural relativism. And they're talking about how, in a different countries, the rules are different, someone might have to wear their hair up in a bun because, people think that's rude there. Or you go to a different country and, you're not really supposed to wear shorts. You should cover your legs at all times if you're a male or something, and so people will point to things like these and say, look, there's different values in different places, depending on where you go. So, the rules of morality are not the same. They're not universal. It all depends. And so I'm curious to see how you would deal with that type of argument someone might make, which I would say they're kind of arguing for a moral relativism. And
I distinguish between values and morals. So to me, morals are based on natural law principles. They're more cut and dry. They're about first principles. You don't murder, you don't assault, you don't lie, coerce, trespass, or steal. You don't rape. You don't do, these are moral laws, okay, morality. And that's true universally. And yet you can have values around, let's say when you do a Native American sweat, women, they encourage women to wear skirts. So it's like a courtesy based on the values of that tradition. There's nothing wrong with that. It's about clarity, really, of what it is. It doesn't mean that it's morally wrong to wear shorts or in a sweat lodge, but it's disrespectful perhaps to do that in a sweat lodge run in a traditional Native American way, right? So we're not saying that you just go around and say, I can do whatever I want because I'm free and I can disrespect your preferences or values when I come into your home. That's different. But it does mean that, let's say we go into a home or a place and they say, you need to pass a test in order to join our club, and I want you to go steal something or kill an animal, right? Then we're crossing the line into a morality issue where we say, whoa, wait a minute, life is valuable. It is not morally appropriate. It's not right to kill or steal. That's the line.
So who makes that line? Why is it that not an arbitrary line? People can say, hey, there's all these bad people in another country doing something, and we bomb those people. We're doing the right thing, right? I mean, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? I think that's where people get frustrated,
Right. And so what basically the bottom line is that humans don't create the laws of morality. Natural law doesn't come from human law. And that's what has created all this chaos and confusion in the world, are humans going in there and saying, well, I'm an authority and I know I have this extra right to impose my will on you, right? And I get to decide that, you know, those people over there, you know, don't belong there, so I'm going to go in and bomb this so I can get that. You know, all of that is all human games. It's humans playing games around control and authority and violating natural law. Natural law comes from the creator. It comes from nature. It's not human made. We are all subject to something bigger than us, something greater than us. And so natural law is that. There are consequences to immoral behaviors. And it happens whether we want it to or not, whether we like it or not. If we violate a natural law, like we murder someone, there are ripple effects to that. There's likely to be a consequence to me, whether it's now or later, or when I face, you know, my death, you know, and then there's a consequence to the people around me. If I go to jail, there's a consequence to my children, my family. There's a consequence to the family of the murdered person. There's all sorts of consequences, and it plays out in all sorts of ways. In any time we violate a natural law principle.
Well, yeah, it's really refreshing to hear you say that. You know, so many people don't understand that, or maybe it's that they've never really heard it put in that way. That's the other thing that occurs to me, because we still have, you know, everywhere you look in our structure, we have in our structure of society, we have just about every system in place is willing to force you to do things or to make people do things, which is clearly crossing that line. And you and I have kind of covered that. And so I think we're pretty well in agreement that harming others, harming life is crossing that line.
Right.
You put that very well. That makes a lot of sense. So let's look a little bit more at some of the gray areas we deal with in our personal lives.
Right.
You know, I mean,
I
go ahead,
wanted to
jump
say,
in.
you know, before we shift too much, is that where the perception comes in is how conditioned we've been to say, obey man's law, right? And so people confuse man's law with God's law. And religion, like Christianity, has confused those two things and made them like one thing. And I'm saying, wait a minute, question that. There's more to that. Is it really true? Is it really true that a law is moral? You know, because if a law is moral, then it's true in every setting, at all times, for all people. If it changes from one state or one county or one person to the other, then it's not a law. It's a human control measure, right?
Yeah, and that's a good way to discern. You know, is to ask yourself, hey, would this apply in a different situation? Would it apply to someone else? Would it apply in all situations? And Jennifer jumped in and asked us about solipsism. You know, that's another good point. You know, I was talking about moral relativism. I think the other thing you see often is people kind of think that reality is just kind of like what I think it is, or you know, I remember in our funnel conference, John talked about this in his childhood, going through this period of time in his life where you start thinking, I think we've all done this at one period of time in our life, maybe everything that's happening is just a projection for me, and I'm the only actor and everybody else is just a stage. You know, like what was the movie with well, I can't remember the name of the movie right now, but you know what I'm talking about, Jim Carrey. And
right.
you know, he's the actor and everybody's watching him, you know. So I'm curious your thoughts on solipsism. And that did come up in your presentation. I remember it did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and so I dated a guy who we were having a conversation about God. Does he believe in God and all this? And he said, no, I believe I'm God. And I was like, well, I'm like all like Pollyanna. I'm like, well, you know, we all have God within us, right? God is part of all of us. And he's like, no, I don't mean that. I mean that I'm God, and I get to control what happens. And that's how he lived. He decided that he wanted certain privileges, right? Certain to do certain things, and he justified them in his mind and did whatever he wanted, basically, to get what he wanted. And thought he was like all it. He's God, you know, and there isn't a higher power, God, or anything beyond that. That he believed that, and he acted in it. What it did, I saw firsthand and experienced, feeling it, you know, was the chaos and the harm done by that to people, right? So to be in that solipsistic mindset, you really have to be pretty uncaring and not very empathic. It's because it's a very narcissistic point of view of
Yeah, and isn't that what we see in like every politician? Is somebody who is willing to put themselves in a position where they're willing to say to others, oh, I'm going to make decisions for all of you, and you're just going to live with it. You know, like they're under the pretense of, well, a bunch of people voted to said I could do this.
Yeah.
But once they get in that spot, then they're like, ah, ha, ha, you know, I mean, how can
I know
how can
what's
that
best
not
for
get
you?
that power, right?
You know, I mean, how's this playing out in the world? Like people saying, I know what's best for you. I know what's best for our country. So we're going to ban this. We're not going to give you this information. We're going to give you this because we care about you, really. You know, I mean, that's the mindset.
The key point, you brought up the word justification, and I was going to ask you to talk about that next, because I think that's really what we're all wrestling with. It's so easy to justify things, and there's gray areas in these situations. And when it gets into our personal lives, that's where it gets tricky, right? Because it's really easy to start justifying things and saying, oh, I have to do this because of that. I mean, we all do that. Even those of us that think we're on the right track, that think we're in the truth movement, and think we're trying to learn to be anarchists, we're still making a lot of compromises. Most of us aren't really quite what we want to be. So we're making justifications. So how does that play into truth and our perception of truth?
You know, unfortunately, I think in this life today, this world, you know, most of us have been acting on automatic pilot. A lot of us, I have, you know, for many years, and kind of going along with things and getting bogged down with life pressures and responsibilities and not really questioning. And then you start to question. You start to see, like, you know, I opened up my eyes to this information, you know, like shared by Mark Passio on What on Earth is Happening, and listening to Jordan Maxwell, and listening to Michael Tessarian and Sethika Esposa and Michael Denny, and, you know, these people that had a big impact on me, where I'm like, oh, these things that I've been taking for granted, whoa, there's a whole nother perspective, a whole nother way of looking at that. And then you start to look at the data, and it all of a sudden you realize you've been living a bit of a lie, you know, or that a lot of what the decisions I've made in my life, or sending my kids to public school, and worrying about credit scores, and, you know, the jobs that I've worked for, things like that, you start to see them in a different way. And I think that's the key, is when you start to have that awareness or the consciousness about what you're doing and about what you're thinking and where those thoughts came from, start to question them, and then you can start to make different decisions, hopefully, or unpeel yourself from all of that matrix, you know, that you've been entangled in. You know, it's like you start to see things for what they are, and how you've been tricked, in a sense, or manipulated or controlled for someone else's gain, ultimately taking away our freedom, you know, because when you play that game that we're given, we get so tangled up that all of a sudden we've like put handcuffs on ourselves. We're all of a sudden like, whoa, I don't really want all of this debt. I don't want this rent that keeps raising, you know, like but I'm here, so now I have to keep paying the bills somehow or figure out how I'm going to get out. Right?
And that's really, the crux of the situation is the life that each of us are living, and that is our realm, our sphere of influence of what. That's why I find your work vital to share with other people, because so much of the things you hear, even in the alternative media, are kind of still pointing the finger at, big pharma's the problem, or these people running the world, and surely they are a problem. But the only real handle we have as individuals on the situation is in our own interpersonal communications and relationships with each other, and what we do with our time and where we put our energy. So there's a process of realization there. And what trips me out is how much we all are in the dark often. It's really easy for a human to lie to themselves and not realize they're doing it. And trips me out. So I'm curious, from all the work you've studied and therapy with people, do you have any insight on why people it's so easy for them to lie to themselves? Constant justifications. How do we get away with that so much? Why is it so hard to see our own lies?
I think there's complex answers to that. So when you're born as an infant, right, you're vulnerable, you're dependent 100% on the people who are taking care of you, and there's a tremendous built-in survival system that we have mentally and physically. And yet, if we don't have somebody feeding us and keeping us warm enough and so forth, we die. And so this attachment connection, the connection from birth on with caregivers, is vital to setting a template for us about how we perceive the world and how we react or respond to perceived dangers, or what we perceive as danger, or whether or not we perceive ourselves as having power, in the world, or if we're victims in the world. So this experience right from birth on is so instrumental in setting a person up for how empowered they feel. And you could describe this as locus of control. Does a person have their locus, their center of control is internal, that I have power to influence, to impact, to make a decision, to say yes, to say no? Do I trust myself to be able to discern? Was I taught the skills of discernment, right? Was I validated? Was I given positive feedback for speaking up and having an opinion? There's all these dynamics that start from infancy through our childhood, and we are dependent on and subject to the influences of the adults in our world and the traumas that we experience, the neglect or lack of, the nurturing, or the trauma, the stress and mental health of our caregivers, of the people in our lives, the indoctrination we get in, that we get in school. And so a lot of people, experience a lot of trauma, and Mark Passio talks about it as self-loathing as the crux of the problem, that people don't love themselves, don't respect themselves, and they haven't been given the tools of proper critical thinking and discernment, or given the belief in themselves that they have a right. A lot of people don't even know their rights to challenge or question what they're being told to do. And in the mainstream schools, it's not okay to question a teacher, really, or challenge the rules. So there's a lot of indoctrination from the beginning. And I think that has everything to do with why people accept lies. You're trained to externalize the locus of control. So the external locus is that the power is outside of us, that it's in the government has the power, the politicians have the power, the president has the power, our, parents have the power, the teachers have the power, the school system has the power. The school system says, oh, the government says we have to do this core curriculum or we won't get paid, and you have to go to school X number of days or you're going to be threatened and taken to court. There's all sorts of coercion and threat that keeps people quite feeling very small, I think, in a lot of ways, and not knowing their rights and not knowing to think. Like mind control techniques, which we all are subject to in, less dramatic ways than, say, like trauma-based mind control, which is really severe, but we are all subject to conditioning through the media, through all of these institutions of our lives, so that we aren't really empowered to think for ourselves. A lot of people don't really think for themselves. They just look it up on Google. They see what the CDC says. What does Fauci say? Whatever, It's like looking outside to these people who have control, who are going to keep us safe, rather than activating, say, that self-defense principle of, I know that I need to protect myself. So I'm going to empower myself to be ready to do what's needed to preserve my well-being and my rights.
We got a cool comment from Jay, and he said, any thoughts on the currency system and how it's used as a weapon by the dark occultists? How can we disconnect so we aren't reliant on big daddy government? And that might be just a tiny bit off topic, but it's right dead on topic when I think about the way that money is part of that, an ingredient to that, what you're describing, that recipe of keeping us, okay, you're already kind of grown up within, whether it's religion or indoctrination through school or parents telling you always listen to authority. But then once you are there and you kind of got your head down and your focus is already, like you're saying, on that external, then you got this pressure of money.
Yeah.
And that is a whole nother
thing. It's totally.
I know you can talk about that.
Yeah. And you were talking before about our energy, right? Our energy is valuable. Well, what takes our energy? What's related to our energy? Time and money, right? In a way. So the whole money system, I see it as a way of keeping us in survival mode, that we constantly have to worry about our basic needs, to keep food and shelter and be safe, right? And we have to work 40 hours a week, right, in order to make enough, maybe not, but you're always kept on that edge. Oh my God, I'm stressed out. To make ends meet. Money we're played with money. Like right now, the gas prices are going up. It affects us all. Can we travel? Can we make our bills, right? So when do we have the energy to, if we're stressing out, it's stealing our energy. It's stealing our physiology. It's impairing us. And
and that is going to affect our decisions, right?
It affects
we're going to justify things we might not otherwise.
Right. And then what we really need is time to contemplate, time to read, to meditate, to gather information, like through that trivium process. It takes time, right? We have to put energy into researching things and studying things and thinking about them and contemplating and talking to people about them, right? And there's not a lot of, that's not the, what's encouraged in our culture, and money has a lot to do with that, I think.
Yeah. Well, look at, when you were talking earlier about, the importance of being able to have discussions about things and get to the bottom of truth, because it's hard for any one of us to get the whole truth on just about anything that happens, let's say, but when you talk with other people, we can get little details and tidbits and start putting it all together. and we get a better picture of the whole reality. But you look at like debate in our modern mainstream society culture. What is debate? People think of a presidential debate. And what is that? It's a bunch of shit throwing. It's one person calling the other person names and trying to make the other one look bad to get ratings. And it's not a debate. And so we don't really have a lot of good examples of how to have a discussion or a debate with other people, much less even our own self. And I think how we talk to ourselves and the way we think is a big part of the problem. And that's part of the problem that we can work on. And so I think that's what your presentation really points to. And Jennifer just said self-actualization is the most important need. So what do you think about that? Like, what can we actually do? Okay, we're already stressed and overwhelmed. We've been indoctrinated. Okay, there's still things we can do, right?
Right. So self-actualization, if you think about Maslow's pyramid, right? So where it's a higher, he's describing this as a hierarchy of needs, and it's not perfect model, but I think it's useful.
Upside down from the native point of view.
The base of that is the basic survival needs. We need food, clothing, shelter. We need to feel safe. Then you go up, to trust in relationships, and you build up through these foundational needs, which, I think that all human beings have a right to food, clothing, shelter, safety, right? And so if those needs are met, it allows then people to go to that place of self-actualization, which is the expansion of our consciousness, and to connect to our spiritual self, right? Ourselves as spiritual beings. What, the whole money system and the way that we're in this like rat race keeps us in the physical world of survival, where we don't get as many opportunities to be in the spiritual, to really explore those spiritual aspects of our reality and ourselves. And then there was another part to your question about what do we do? And I think that comes back to the locus of control. We have to take back the power into our own core. We need to look at ourselves and take responsibility for our role in how we've created our own life. Yes, we're impacted by the decisions of everyone else through, history and in the present time. And the way to true freedom is for the majority, to recognize their, what their rights are and stand for freedom. But yet we can do something within our own circle of influence and within our own life. As much as we can do is matters, right? Even if we can't live entirely free and sovereign, and we can make decisions, and that may mean that we give up comforts or take steps that are scary because they're really outside of our conditioning, right? So we can, I left a job because I was unwilling to participate in the mandates that they were imposing on me. They were coercing me to do. I wasn't willing to do that. So I left. I'm not 100% out of the system, but I'm in was able to make some really clear lines about what I'm willing to do or not do, and that I think influenced other people. There's all sorts of ways. So Mark
I'm going to come back to Will's comment, but Jennifer said security is an illusion, and I think that's right along with what you're saying.
It plays into our fear, right? Fear is used against us, and we have that's a natural response to a perceived threat to survival is fear, and then some kind of a way to protect oneself. And so when the system that we're in is capitalizing on our fear, they're promoting our fear, they're throwing us off balance, we're in the R complex and the limbic system of our brain. We're not activating our frontal lobes and our thinking brain that well, right? So it's a cycle.
So like we're living our whole life thinking the only reason we're safe from danger is because we have things like government to protect us, and that's why people react when we try to say, hey, government is evil. We need to stop having anything to do with it. They're like, well, what's going to keep me safe? Their mind is very attached to that idea that you can be safe, but that's not actually a fact about nature. This reality is that there is no safe. I like Jen's point. That's an illusion. But
a lot of things are an illusion, because if we're looking to the outside, we're abdicating our own sovereignty, right, and our own power to create security. Like who has the power to create our own security? We do. And we can learn the
like
skills
with a good community, right?
What's that?
By making good, like if you have a good community and a good system of friends and a good system of self-defense, you can create a certain amount of security that someone else otherwise wouldn't have, right? I mean,
and skills and knowledge, right? Survival skills, intrinsic having. So if we go back to the idea of value, what has intrinsic value? Those things that help us survive, to live harmoniously with the earth, to understand that this earth is abundant, that we have everything we need, and that if we learn to harmoniously work with the laws of nature, we have food, we have shelter, we have clothing, we have friends, we have safety, we have security. This is all the things that come from within and through our expanding network of community that understands living through natural law and taking intrinsic control over their lives, right? And living within the nonviolence principle and the self-defense principle, learning about morality and living that way. That's ultimately what brings security. It's not our military,
Yeah, but in the meantime, that's where I want to bring it back to Will's comment. He said dependency of external factors like government institutions, food, education, health. People have outsourced their power to the control system through generational conditioning. So that's been going on for quite some time. Now that we find ourselves in that situation, many of us can't easily extricate ourselves. There's people that are, have been used to getting their money from government for quite some time. And, they're recently coming to realizations that, hey, I'm getting my money from an evil source. That money was ill-gotten. It was stolen. I don't really want to do that anymore, but I still got to feed my kids, and so people are in a lot of ways feeling like their hands are tied. But I like what you said, that we look for the things we can do, right? And we start working on those,
I mean,
and stop making justifications why we can't do those things.
Right. And it is the dependency on the external that has created the perception that we don't have the power to be self-reliant or self-sufficient. That's a belief based on an indoctrination. Okay, there are skills that we can acquire to obtain our own food in nature. We don't need to grocery store that. We can grow food. We can forage food. We can, a lot of people don't even know where food comes from. It doesn't come from a grocery store, originally. And education doesn't need to come from the mainstream school. And the healthcare system isn't even really about health. It's been hijacked, and true health comes through other means, and we can learn and study those and empower ourselves. We don't have to be dependent on those external factors anymore, and that's, I think, the education that is needed for people to help them not be afraid to extricate themselves from the system. Many people, I can't leave my job because I'll lose my health insurance. I need to stay in this job because it's giving me good retirement, right? It's this idea that they're going to be like rudderless, or without a foundation to stand on if they don't have this government help or whatever, the health insurance. And it is a bit scary, when you think about it sometimes, but that, I think, is where we need to push through those fears and take some of those calculated risks.
Well, I think what you're doing by making presentations and by putting these things into words and then sharing them with others, that provides that opportunity, number one, for the debate, as you discussed, and number two, for people to start seeing the little things that we can do differently. And, it's one thing coming from this weird bearded conspiracy guy, but it's another thing coming from someone like yourself who's like, an attractive female who's a therapist, and it's like, well, we get these things coming from all these different perspectives, and someone else hears it for the first time, it might actually make a little sense, and they might say, maybe there are a few things I can do to change, my day-to-day living and life. So I guess the next part of the conversation is going forward. When we think about these ideas, we're talking about truth and perception. We have a lot of people thinking that you can just believe things are going to get better, or you can just manifest, the world you want to live in. And a lot of people want to be really optimistic about the future, but there's a lot of problems. So how would you apply truth in terms of how we think forward about the future and how we project forward, and look at reality with the eyes of truth,
Yeah. Well, I would
Does that
say
make sense?
that there's a lot of there's power in our thinking, and positive thinking and optimism is important. Gratitude is important, right? Aligning our thoughts and our emotions with our actions, though, is really key. We have to go past just the positive thoughts and the imagination of like visualizing love and light. That's good. That's good. There's very likely energetic power to our thoughts, and our united optimism, right? But that's not enough to change the physical reality that we're in and the world conditions. So I think that part of taking action through facing yourself honestly, right? Facing the knowledge of this corruption in the world, and how if we're participating in it, we are working against all that positive thinking we're doing over here in our meditation time. There has to be an action that aligns with that, which is, if you know in your heart that, and you believe, you're able to kind of make an affirmation that the world is abundant, that the nature is abundant, okay? Then walk that talk. Why do you need health insurance? In a way, like really question these things that are so automatic, where we get defensive. Where do you get defensive? Look at that. Instead of just saying, well, this is my truth, I don't want to talk about it. It's like, notice where you get defensive and start to question it, and start to imagine a new way of living that is based on abundance and comes from truth and a certain harmonization with nature, as opposed to relying on a man-made system that is giving us the illusion of security and safety, but is really using us, right? And keeping us enslaved and small and limited, and taking us away from our spiritual center, our spiritual self. I don't know if that answered.
Yeah, it's just I guess what's the little thing that bothers me is thinking about, that's like a pretty positive way to look at things, but there's a lot of struggle ahead of us. I think a lot of us are afraid of what's coming because, like you said, we're seeing gas prices at somewhere they've never been. We've seen people divided on issues that, shouldn't even be serious enough issues to divide people. And it's hard sometimes to talk to people about truth. If you say, no, there is truth, then I've had people get judgment of me, like I'm trying to say I know everything, and I guess what I'm getting at is there's a lot of conflict with the average person I might talk to, or someone listening to the show might have a discussion with. And, I want to come out and tell people, you need to just tell people the truth, the hard, straight truth, that, you can't just believe in whatever reality you want to believe in. But a lot of people don't take it so well. So I guess what I was curious to hear is, being a therapist and good with people, any advice or tips you would have for people on how to bring up these subjects, how to discuss them with people when so many people are just not ready to hear them, or they're so close-minded.
I mean, I think we're doing it in the best way we know how, in terms of our sharing of information and ideas, and encouraging people to question and think. And, in the presentation, Truth versus Perception, when my truth isn't the truth, I share about cognitive distortions and different approaches to questioning your thoughts and beliefs. And that is part really key here. And everybody has a pain point. And I think it's about finding the pain point that people have. Most people aren't happy about, what's going on in the world, in this, that, or that, whatever their investment is, or, their button that gets pushed. And, and they're not happy with their jobs, or working so much, or the price of gas. So I think those are entry points into the conversation, and then asking questions about it, asking questions. You can do it in ways that aren't incredibly offensive or aggressive, to just, ask some questions about, is it really true that gas prices really have to go up? Do we really need oil and whatever? Start to question, and where's this info coming from? And you can work with questions and encouraging people to come back to reflect on their own thoughts. It ultimately comes down to people being willing to question themselves. And from there, and then say, well, if you don't like something, then what is what is it, the state of being? I guess that's another thing that's important. It's about the state of being. Our state of consciousness is what people are seeking, but going about it through seeking material things, right? And material things aren't the answer. So there's lots of inroads, to this dialogue, but the dialogue's important, and getting past the censorship is important.
Yeah, and I think what you said that really sticks out for me is that it's more about asking ourselves questions. Asking someone else questions might be a good way to deal with someone that's really disagreeing with you, just to show them you're listening and to get them to talk about things. But, the more clear we are within ourselves, I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
The other thing is just being a role model of being happy in the steps that we're taking towards sovereignty, right? As we're detaching from the system, we're also building a new community. And this community is bringing real fulfillment. I know in my life, the most fulfilling things I experience come through this sort of new experience of community that is built around the idea of sovereignty and self-sufficiency. And as we do that, and we share that, and we are happy, content, in this experience, and we are healthy and vibrant, and we're not scared, people may say, I want some of that. How do you get there? And we can share about that, and we can include people in part of our journey there. I mean, that's another way of looking at it.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate that. Even though I threw a little bit of darkness in there, you still brought it back to the light. and pointing people towards solutions. And as far as that goes, I would point people to your website, where you've done a lot of work, just an impressive amount, alivethrive.life. And you're now on the One Great Work Network, and you have some stuff to share there. You can look up Leslie Powers on the One Great Work Network, or check her out on alivethrive.life. And you also do supervision for coaches. How else would someone get a hold of you, Leslie?
I think the best way would be through my website and the email that's there,
Okay.
vibrantlightcounseling@gmail.com would be the best way.
From alivethrive.life. Yeah, so
Yeah.
folks, go on over there. If you're looking for answers to all your questions that you ever had,
Right.
it's on
All
Leslie's
of them.
website. No, but you got a lot of good work there, and I found it very impressive. And I look forward to seeing what you're going to be putting out next. I'll look forward to seeing your work, because you're going to be with us at the Funnel 2 conference. And I wanted to tell people Funnel 2 conference is now planned for September 10th and 11th. And we're going to be talking about that more in future weeks. I hope I can get Leslie to come back and join me again, because I really appreciate your insight and your way of looking at things. Thanks for joining me today, Leslie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Chris. It's been
All
fun.
right, we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
All right, bye.
Okay, folks. Thanks so much for joining me for the End Evil podcast. We'll be back next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. And so take Leslie's advice. Look for questions you can ask yourself. Examine your own areas that bring about issues for you, and never stop questioning. And evil is the destruction of freedom. Thanks for joining me, folks. We'll see you next week.